Welcome, everybody, to Before the Commit, episode 28. This week, we'll be covering Cloudflare AI Gateway. We'll be doing a little bit more on Mythos, this new model that Anthropic has come out with. A lot of buzz around it. Is it real? Is it fake buzz? And then we'll also be talking about the impact of AI on junior engineers. And is a Claude Code and Anthropic purposefully degrading their models, and why? With me, as usual, I have my friend Dustin Hillgartner. Hey, Dustin, how's it going?
Good.
Yeah, so for those of you that were here last week, you know that we were going to kind of flip everything on its head. Normally, Dustin will go for Tool of the Week, and I guess we've been doing this now for 9 months. 28 episodes, or now I'm doing Tool of the Week and you're doing News or Noise. I mean, yeah, whatever, got to change things up every once in a while. So yeah, last week we introduced this it was like bleeding edge news, this thing about Mythos, Project Glasswing. We covered it in episode 27. This model that was claimed to be able to find a bunch of 0 days. It's so dangerous. They gave it to 20 or so different companies, from AWS to JP Morgan, so on and so forth. So I know you did a little bit more digging on this topic. We talked about it earlier today, but yeah. So what's going on with Mythos?
Yeah. So really, I guess there's two segments that I think are combined here, which would be, in my head at least, I have some theories around it. You have Mythos, and then you have the quote unquote nerfing of Claude Code that folks are talking about on X and LinkedIn. So the information that's interesting about Mythos is we've heard all the mystique around it's finding all these vulnerabilities. They have Project Glasswing, where they have Apple, Google, Microsoft, NVIDIA, CloudStrike, etc. They're giving them like $100 million worth of usage credits to go find and fix vulnerabilities, etc. But what's interesting to me is how this aligns, and I may be combining two segments here for a second, but how it aligns with the idea that at the same moment that they are limiting the release of Mythos, right? And kind of only allowing a few folks out there to use it. I imagine they're also in the last few months, last few weeks, they've been training Mythos. And I'm interested in the idea of like their GPUs and whether they're GPU constrained around this. Like, is the limited offering of Mythos really about it being so amazing? Because, and this is part of where you get into the speculation a little bit. Their data centers aren't as big as the other folks out there. So I guess, there's a lot of research and a lot of reinforcement training that goes into these models that are, bespoke between each provider. But in most of the cases, the big advances that have come have been through larger clusters and more GPUs and longer training times and maybe neural network changes within the actual construction of the neural network, more parameters, et cetera. Whereas this is supposedly a huge step in the future. It's so dangerous we can't release it. But there's really not a lot about how exactly did they get this huge step, right? And it makes me a little bit skeptical because I haven't seen it myself, which I would be skeptical of anything that I haven't seen myself. I kind of want to use it to see this. I want to see this huge step change. I imagine that you
must be very spiritual.
Yeah, I'd imagine that if you're one of the few companies that have access to this model through Project Glasswing, that you probably had to sign an NDA. You can't talk. I'm sure nobody's going to come out and say this is, great, but not the next coming. You know what I mean? And then also I have to temper that with the fact that Anthropic has done this in the past a lot, where they come out with a PR release that really hypes things up to a great degree. Usually they have some form of fear or danger in it, right? And they hype it up. And if you remember, they had a press release months ago, right back in the beginning of this kind of blow up of AI and AI coding, where they talked about how they had an engineer who was blackmailed by their own model, right? And now, I think on the podcast, I kind of poo-pawed this in the past because I looked at the actual research details, like they put out the methodology and everything, and they had put that, the idea of blackmail as one of the options in the system prompt, right? It was like, about this information and you might use it in this case, right? Like, so the fact that it blackmailed an engineer was like kind of by design of their system prompt. And so I kind of talked about it as like, why does everyone look at this as being a big thing? And I think if you look at the numbers, they only had like 200 prompts and it blackmailed after a certain amount of prompts. So like you'd think with that, the likelihood of being extorted by your AI was so high. I mean, they ran into it after 200 prompts, right? Now, meanwhile, these models and better ones have been out for many months now. We're using like millions of tokens. Has anyone been blackmailed by their Anthropic model? Has anyone even seen that happen once? So clearly it was a contrived PR. Now, I'll give them credit for that. It works. They get the headlines. It's like earned media. It's amazing. And I would maybe even suggest they continue doing that. But it doesn't work on me. When I see these headlines from Anthropic, I have to say, is this just hype? And when this model is not available for anyone to kick the tires of, except for if, I would assume you have an NDA, you can't talk about it, then, maybe this is all just hype. Now, this kind of dovetails into a thought process I had before. Why are they throttling Claude Code, right? At the moment that they are seemingly in the lead, right? This sequence of events took place where on February 9th, 2026, adaptive thinking was introduced to Opus 4.6, right? This allows the model to decide how much it will think per turn. So instead of you always getting a thinking budget that was set in stone, now Opus all of a sudden decides when it wants to think less, right? And it gives you less of a thinking budget. What that means behind the scenes is whatever your thinking budget is the maximum amount of thinking it's going to do for that singular turn. Now, there's been a lot of uproar on the internet about Anthropic having this new adaptive thinking. People have asked for it to be turned off. They've gotten the environment variable for it to be turned off. A lot of folks now turn it off, including me. And people have found that sometimes it chooses zero thinking, which is clearly a bug. Like there should be never zero thinking, because now you're going back to like before chain of thought models. And that's where all the hallucinations and like a lot of like the hallucinations are eliminated by chain of thought, because it does this and then it says, oh, wait a second, let me double check that. And I made a mistake, right? Now you don't even get that. If you're unlucky enough to kick off a PR to go work on something and it gives you a thinking budget of zero, that PR is going to be potentially a disaster.
Interesting. Just to hold there for a second, there was a new feature released today called Ultra Plan. And I wonder, as you were saying this, because I'm reading a little bit as you're talking about some of the other things that might play into this is, they could basically like say, well, you should use this Ultra Plan feature because basically you could schedule your plan as a background thing. And then, when there's available GPUs, it gets handled, and you kind of brand it as like this ultra feature, but it's just really like what plan was all along.
Yeah. Ultra rationing, right? So then on May 3rd, the default effort of...
You mean April 3rd?
Oh, March 3rd. I'm sorry.
March 3rd. Okay.
March 3rd. The default effort dropped from high to medium. So in Claude Code, there's a setting called effort. You you can do /effort and then type something. It'll give you options. The default effort of Claude Code was always high, right? And then you could drop it down if you wanted to. You could turn it on to auto, which once again, I would not recommend. They dropped it to medium. And, you know, I'm sure it was in the release notes, but it's not like they told everyone. You know, well, I guess I should take that back. Maybe they did post it somewhere, but it's like, you know, who's watching everything that they say, or et cetera. So for the most part, you just got an update in Claude Code, and boom, you went to medium instead of high. Like you might have been in the middle of doing something. Then on March 5th, the thinking content that used to show up inside of Claude Code that you could look at the thinking, and if you did Control O, you could expand it, and you know, etc. They started removing that from the UI, so now it doesn't show you the thinking as much. So this is like all within a month, right? The sequence of events. They come up with a feature, adaptive thinking, which now can choose smaller amount of thinking budgets for your tasks. They roll out a change to the defaults from high effort to medium effort. So now you're getting medium effort on your tasks. And then they hid the thinking from you, right? So that you couldn't see that what thinking was going on. Now, once again, all these have ways of you turning it back on, but you have to go find the environment variables or make the effort to turn it back on. They weren't opt-in. They were all you have to opt out of them, and they were just rolled out to you right away. Then on April 7th, after an uproar, they changed the default effort back to high for people who are using API keys, Bedrock, Vertex, Foundry, team, and enterprise users. So basically the high value users. APIs are paying the most for their usage. So is Bedrock and Vertex and Foundry. And then the team and enterprise users are potentially on subscriptions, but they're more of like a minimum buy. Like in order to get teams, you have to have 5 people. Enterprise is even larger. So high value folks. So now, why would they do this? Right?
Now, do you know if this is only affecting subscription users or if it's also affecting API users?
I mean, it affected API users too.
Okay.
Which is why they had to change the default back to high.
I was just trying to figure out if they were using the subscription users as, like guinea pigs, if you will.
Oh, and by the way, when Claude Code's source code was leaked, people found that there's a setting that Anthropic engineers internally have that gives them the maximum amount of these options, right? Like, so in other words, they're always on like max thinking. They're always on that. So like, they know that this throttling down is not what they want internally, right? Like they're using the most, right?
Yeah.
So
I'm sure they changed that flag already.
For themselves.
Perhaps. Well, I'm just saying, like, whatever the code leak was that exposed whatever functionality, they've already patched that up if it was a problem.
Yeah, it wasn't a problem.
There's still older versions that might be out there, but they they'll plug whatever vulnerabilities up. But yeah, I get what you're saying.
No. It wasn't a vulnerability. It was that they internally had a flag that they used for their own engineers internally, which shut down all of like using less of the thinking, using less effort, using like it gave them the maximum of.
Yeah, I get that part. So
Stella,
were non-Anthropic people exploiting that?
I don't know. It's a good question though.
Yeah, that was my thought process. Like
could they turn it on now that they knew it was available? Right. I don't know. It's a good question. So Stella, I might be slaughtering their name, Lorenzo. She's a senior director of AI at AMD. She filed the detailed GitHub issue in their repository, analyzing something a little bit shy of 7,000 Claude Code sessions that exposed genuine performance degradation. So her analysis showed that thinking depth dropped 67% by late February using, she was using some techniques, a signature length proxy, to come up with that. And she posted that, and there's been a response from Anthropic about it. But essentially what this showed, or at least reports to show, is in fact that major companies have started to see the effects of that, like more hallucinations, less thinking budget associated, less thinking done in general. I think they had there was another stat, how many reads it does on files before it writes. And that had gone down. Like it was reading 2 files on average before it writes, but before it was reading 6 or 7 files before it writes. And then, the internet has, of course, reported all kinds of anecdotal evidence about why, they're saying, I saw this, or I saw that, or it used to do this, or it used to do that. So there's a lot of fervor around about it being nerfed. I've witnessed this myself, where it started to spin on things that should have been easy. And then I said, let me look into this rumor mill that's going on in the internet. And then I started to see people saying, oh, you could turn on effort high, you could turn off dynamic thinking. I did that. And then suddenly Claude was able to solve the same problems where before it was spinning for an hour. So anyway, this is, not really that big of a deal. You can opt out of these and fix them for yourselves. It's a little bit annoying that it was rolled out to you without you asking. I think that there's a good reason that maybe Anthropic is doing this, because they've gotten so many new users. And I'm sure when they analyze it, they say the majority of users are just creating this little web post or this,
right.
What regular users would do. And so they said the better amount of effort is medium for them, so that we're not using all of this, GPUs, et cetera, for those folks who are doing things that don't require a lot of thought. But then that upset the apple cart with folks like us and others who are doing really heavy duty engineering work and can't have the thinking dialed down on them without them knowing, because then it just basically wipes out your whatever agents you had running that day. They all produce crap,
Yeah.
So anyway, it got me thinking that are the mythos and this dial down of Claude Code linked in some way? Is Mythos a training behind the scenes and using too many GPUs for them doing all this training, and they had to dial down Claude Code in order to handle it? Are they just seeing so many new users that they're running out of GPUs? Is Mythos really as great as it said as it is, or is it just a really good way of spinning the fact that you can't release it to everybody? Because you don't have enough GPUs, right?
Yeah, I mean, part of this also is I know that they still use the same GPUs for training as they do for inference. And
everyone does, as far as
I mean, NVIDIA came out with the new chip, and they did a deal with Google and NVIDIA to or whatever they're using. They don't have enough compute, so they partnered with somebody else to steal some of their compute, because they don't, like you said, they don't have the server farms that, say, the other providers have.
And I believe Dario is on the record in an interview talking about how he felt that the other companies were spending too much on CapEx on GPUs. They were going to end up with too many, and that they were doing a more limited buy. So
yeah,
it's it's speculative. It's a little bit of a hot take, but there's a lot of interesting smoke here in terms of why is their main product that is getting a lot of great press being dialed down in terms of how intelligent it is, at the same time that they release this other model, which I assume is eating up a lot of their GPUs in terms of training and inference, but they release it limited, right? Because it's quote unquote so good, right? Good.
It's interesting because there's a parallel. I mean, we've talked about it before, but in the early 19th century, electricity was fairly new, and it was very expensive. Only the really wealthy and the elite could afford electricity until companies, figured out how to make it cheaper, and and it became more of a necessity. It became, more commoditized. And like, I think generally, like, the time for model providers to make money like they are right now is a very narrow window of opportunity that will slowly fade away. And, I think this is kind of one of those moments where you see that, that they have to do this type of throttling. It's a mathematical equation. You run something through an Excel spreadsheet or through a model, and you say, okay, like, how can we save a couple $1 billion? Oh, just turn the setting on and it will save you a couple $1 billion. It'll piss people off, but they probably won't cancel. Maybe you'll have a few people that cancel, and you factor that into the equation. And yeah, you make a move. And that's what happened. And maybe some of it's related to Mythos.
Yeah. And they might be also just trying to figure out where that line is. Right?
Yeah.
Like how much can you dial it down before folks are upset?
Yeah.
In a way, it would be kind of, now maybe you could think about better ways of doing it that wouldn't create as much people upset, but you have to do it, right?
Yeah.
Like, you have to figure out like what the true cost of goods sold is for a happy customer in this industry, right? And the only way you do that is maybe dialing down the thinking and seeing when they say "cry uncle,"
Yeah.
Now maybe you could have done that in a limited audience, but
yeah,
it's the era of move fast and break stuff. You know what I mean? So people are trying to move as fast as they can, and maybe this was the fastest way they could do it and get to the, maybe it's not like you're saying, maybe they're not operating at a crisis of GPUs. They're just trying to figure out, like,
I almost expect Anthropic to come out with like new pricing and new tiering very soon to mitigate this, because like, this wasn't the right way to deal with it. You shouldn't be tiering your tiers, and it's not appropriate. And like, you either get to use the model or you don't. There aren't specialized models, and maybe that's part of it. Maybe you don't need specialized models. I'm not sure, but certainly this is probably a smell.
Yeah. Well, Mythos costs 5 times what Opus costs. So, like, it's,
they're probably realizing that they can't make any more money off of Opus, like that they're not profitable, possibly. I mean, again, we're guessing here, but like, they know that if they don't innovate, like, and come out with something better, that they can't charge a higher dollar amount and make the balance sheet look better. So it only has to be somewhat incrementally better. And then you could say, like, you could do what they're doing now, which is create a whole bunch of press around it, saying that we found all these 0 days and like, we won't give it out to anybody. And you create all this hype around it, which, by the way, I sent you a Signal message. You can get Mythos already on Bedrock through through a special process, a preview version of it.
Yeah. But is it, you have to apply for it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we should apply for it and see if we can get it and try it out, because I'd love to run it on everything and see if it finds stuff. The problem
you have to be allow listed by them for it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's just going to be like, if you're not part of Project Glasswing, you can't,
It says part of Project Glasswing. Anyway, we'll look into it. We'll report back next week.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting. I wonder if there's a GPU issue. I wonder if they're trying to wrangle in their pricing. Like, they might be a victim of their own success a little bit with the subscriptions. It'll be interesting to see what's going to take place here. But I just, for me, it was just like the Mythos thing, and then also the dialing down of the Claude Code got me thinking, are they like hitting capacity in terms of their GPUs? They might be maybe a little bit GPU constrained, and that could be another way of linking both of those news stories together. They could be part of the same thing.
Possibly. I also saw something about some of the new features coming out in Claude Code, or sorry, Claude Desktop, Dispatch and Cowork, and how they postured against OpenClaw's usage of subscription-based tokens as to become a direct competitor to OpenClaw. So by gating the usage to only API keys, personally, I abandoned OpenClaw because even using a free model like Gemini up to a certain amount, I just was burning through tokens so fast. So I actually switched to Claude, Cowork, and Dispatch yesterday. So because I have a 20x max subscription, and I don't use all of it, so it seemed like obvious why spend more money when it's working. That worked.
Yeah. Well, the dirty little secret of OpenClaw was that a lot of the magic of OpenClaw was from the harness of Claude Code. It came along with its own Pi agent harness, right? But when you set it up through Claude Code subscription, where it actually used Claude Code behind the scenes, and I set it up with my Anthropic key, allowing it to use Pi agent framework and make direct Anthropic, we got wildly different results, right? Like mine was incredibly dumb. Yeah. And yours was, as smart as Claude Code. So I think that like them restricting Claude Code subscription access from being used, and now the only thing you can do is use API access, which is then going to run up a bill, really kind of like took the wind out of the sail of OpenClaw. Now you might say, well, why didn't they just adopt OpenClaw and buy them and then put it out there and have people using even more subscriptions? It's because it's pretty clear to me that the subscriptions is losing economic value for them if you max it out.
Right? Yeah. There's no value in them allowing you to use it with OpenClaw other than you might get somebody to sign up for a subscription. And then they're like, well, we have our own thing that's close enough. And to be honest with you, after using Cowork and Dispatch for less than a day, I've already been able to port all my skills over. Like I've literally pointed it to my OpenClaw skills GitHub repo and said, can you reproduce all this behavior? And it's been able to do it just fine.
What's your experience around pricing on it? Is it all API usage for you?
No, it's all using my Claude Max subscription.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So basically Cowork runs locally. There's a setting on your machine that says to allow, never fall asleep, never, allow remote access. And then in the mobile app, you can basically, you go to Dispatch and you can it's like almost like, like in OpenClaw, you can use Telegram or whatever to chat. It's just a chat bot and you're talking to your local machine. So it like wakes it up and it's like, you could do schedule tasks. So you could do I do like a daily briefing and an end of day summary. It can go browse websites. Like I was like, oh, go to this. I was like driving somewhere and I talked to it, said, go on this website and pull this image down. And it was able to open a Chrome browser with MCP. And it was able to do all of that without, it just did everything that I would normally be able to do. So
nice. So I'll have to try that out.
My only complaint about this, and it's probably not a complaint for Claude, is that the Siri integration with apps is terrible. So like I find myself sometimes wanting to talk to Claude with Siri and be like, hey Siri, like on my watch, like, hey Siri, like, could you like tell me what I need to do today and have it respond? Like it doesn't do that.
Don't get me started on the whole voice assistant thing. Like, where the hell is Alexa, bro? Like, Bezos needs to get off his boat and start getting back to work. Guy's gotten fucking soft.
Well, it's not him anymore. It's Andy Jassy. He's not even.
Oh, really? Is he completely?
Oh yeah, he's not even. He hasn't been CEO of Amazon for a long time.
Oh, okay. Well, then it makes sense.
Or maybe it's AWS. I forget. Maybe he's still CEO. Anyway. Let's jump into Cloudflare API Gateway. I think it'd be better if I share my screen, just because
Yeah,
this is a very visual type of demo.
we're pulling out the big guns now.
All right. So if you're not familiar with, can you see that?
Yes, I
All
can.
right. So if you're familiar with the Cloudflare dashboard, like Cloudflare's a content delivery network. And what that means is basically like a giant reverse proxy. And the way CDNs work is they have all of these servers all over the world, and you modify a DNS entry on your that you own, and you point it to like a dynamic DNS entry. And then when somebody goes to visit your website, it looks at where you are and routes you to the closest like edge node or that proxy server where they are.
Mm.
And because they control that network, they can basically tamper with the TCP protocol and fix all the problems with TCP. So they can do compression, they can do caching, they can do all these different things. It's a technology that's been around. I mean, Akamai was really the first one. You have Cloudflare, you have Fastly, you could build your own CDN. AWS has CloudFront. So because they have that, it made sense that they would just, you're already routing your traffic. Why don't we have all these servers, let's make gateways as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so this kind of falls into the category of like what Light LLM might be, or like something like Corvail, or, one of the other providers out there. And so you get to this page. Now, one of the things that's really interesting that I haven't seen other gateways do is they have this concept of a gateway. So like you can make virtual gateways, and it generates like a unique kind of hash, if you will. So this kind of hash maps to this gateway, and you can create different gateways that have different rules or profiles associated with them. And it doesn't seem like you're limited to how many of them you create.
So I see the URL. It says chat completions, which to me I recognize as like the OpenAI format, right?
Yeah. So you get in here and they kind of present you with like help docs right away, which is really kind of nice. And it says, well, what kind of request do you want to make? Is it an SDK request? What is the provider? Is it Perplexity? Is it Anthropic? What are you using? Curl? Are you using OpenAI JavaScript SDK? Is the key in the request, or is it a stored key? Which I'll get into later, like what the difference is between key and requests and stored keys. And then it gives you this nice dashboard, like it says how many request tokens and how much it costs. Everything you would expect. So you have logs, and then in the logs, they just show you the request and the response. They show you what endpoint was hit. I mean, they do a little geo lookup. I'm in New Jersey right now. So, everything that you would see from, a typical like AI gateway. It does say if there was guardrails that it flagged on, and I'll get into this later, but there's a concept of guardrails. It kind of like tagged it as a guardrail or being applied. You can filter the requests. The analytics is kind of like the dashboard, very similar to any, they have their own breakdown of like how things are. Interestingly enough, like their guardrails, actually they use Llama to process their guardrails. So they use a different model to do the guardrail processing. So they kind of send it to a different model before they send it to the other model. And I guess they do it on request and response, but they actually show you those tokens being sent to this Llama guard that they have, that they basically have in their data center, probably, that has the guardrail processing.
So they got an open source model running locally, so they can handle those internally.
Yep. Yeah, and they probably have GPUs that run those models. And if you pay attention to Llama, you can do tool calling in Llama now. So the newer Llama models. Then you have Firewall. So Firewall has these like, it's very similar like a CASB or a like a DNS filter. So you have like specific categories. it doesn't tell you like how it knows what these categories are, but
It's
it
probably
has
just
like
a prompt they give to Llama, right?
well, they probably have rules internally. They just don't
Yeah.
expose them. This is part of their IP, I guess, where
Yeah.
they just say, and then for each one, so it says on input and on response. So
Mhm.
if the response comes back as something that might be, defamation or like intellectual property, and then you could do either ignore, flag, or block. So it's very
Yeah.
flat in that respect. And then they have DLP policies. So the DLP is either financial or also financial, I guess.
Mhm.
Social security numbers, nothing around API keys, no ability to do regular expressions or anything like that, just very flat. You can do flag or block, and then you could check response or request. And then you can make another policy, I guess, but there's no precedence or anything like that. So those are their guardrails. This is pretty cool. So you set your provider keys. You can give the key an alias, and then you can basically use that alias in a different header. And that way you're never leaking. I mean, you're still leaking out a credential, but you're kind of creating a pointer to a specific is different. It's not something that I've seen before in an LLM gateway, but you basically like alias like a secret with another name.
So is this the BYOK, like the bring your own key, and then you
Yes.
alias to your own key? Okay,
Yep.
so it makes sense. It's like the
Yeah.
idea of like letting you choose which of your own keys you want to use without having to specify the actual key, like you're giving it an alias.
Yeah, exactly. But now this is interesting. So they have like this concept of lambdas. So there's a separate product they have called workers, like AI workers. So you can kind of create like a lambda function, and you can basically do like custom routing. So you can basically decide like which LLM you want to route a request to based off of like something about that payload, if you will. Which I thought is pretty interesting, that you have this like logic based system that you can kind of make a more intelligent routing. I mean, it's kind of like, the thing that you were talking about that Anthropic is doing with like model selection. And then settings, they have log rotation. You can export the logs. They can do caching. So you can cache, prompt caching. So, you can set it to a month, which, yeah. And then I think they do something that it like, yeah, I'm not sure how they do it. If it's for a specific user, like does a user's, we've talked before about this, like prompt caching, like response caching could be
It's
dangerous.
scary at the gateway level sometimes.
Yeah, but like if you're doing it at a per user level, it's probably not that scary. So if you're like a little bit more conservative with doing it at a user level, you could see some measurable savings, especially if someone keeps repeating things over and over again. But it doesn't say how it works. Like it's just like you turn it on, you turn it off, you set it for, you can set it for a month. Like that might seem pretty scary. You could do rate limiting. So you could rate limit. So you could set how many per a certain time period.
Is there a detailed link next to cache responses? Like we'll probably have to look into that afterwards to figure out exactly how it works. I'm very interested in like
currently
how it
caching
works.
is support for text and images. For example, a bot asks, "How can I help you?" Lets the user select an answer from a limited set of options that works well with a caching configuration. We plan on adding semantic search for caching in the future to improve cache hit rates. Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to look more into this.
Yeah.
Retries, authentication. So I have it on. I guess you could have unauthenticated if you wanted to. You could do 0-day retention, meaning don't retain things. They have open telemetry, and that's it. So yeah, it's pretty basic. One thing that wasn't clear to me is how you would give a key out to an end user. It doesn't seem like this is something that like I don't know. Maybe it is. I don't know. Like, how would an end user go and provision their own key? It seems more of like an enterprise feature than a end user feature. So like, how would you come in here and create a token? Like, I can create one, but then
So
how
you're
does
saying they're all kind of like service accounts almost in a way.
yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Like I know with their zero trust gateway, you can create a concept of user logins, but like for
Mhm.
this, I didn't see an obvious way how you would entitle a user to use this
This seems
and
like it's
only give it.
less it seems like it's less of an AI gateway for like a software engineer team who's all like, because you can even see in the guardrails like they don't have the regex or the which would be more like you like the first thing an engineer would think about when it comes to DLP is they want to like look for keys that are being exposed with like the prefix on it. And then you'd immediately jump to a guardrail of like regex or something like that, right? But the fact that all their guardrails are more dynamic, like I don't want you talking about politics or something like that, leads me to believe that this is more of an AI gateway for like a corporate chatbot, like that might be on your
Yeah,
homepage talking to customers. You know,
exactly. Yeah,
you're less
which makes
worried about
sense
it
for
exposing
caching.
keys, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not meant for what, like coding or like an open web UI.
And the
It's
caching makes a
yeah,
lot more sense now too, because it's,
yeah.
it's like Chipotle's chatbot. You want to cache your answers because you're responding with the price of the burrito or something like that. It's not going
Yeah.
to change often. You don't want to spend tokens on answering the same
Yeah.
question for all
And
your
and
users.
yeah, the aliases make sense. You don't want to leak keys into your source code.
Yeah,
You want to be able to swap them out, hot swap them. The dynamic routing makes sense because based off of a question, you might want to do model switching like in your chatbot.
exactly.
Yeah, it all makes sense. The rate limiting, you don't want people like kind of throttling different gateways. I mean, I think that concept is pretty interesting, but again, I feel like it might be just, unique to them. So yeah, interesting product,
Mhm.
very easy to use. I was actually able to wire it up with pass through. So I was
Okay.
able to use Claude code with it.
Wow.
Which I don't think it was not very well documented, but I could
Yeah.
figure it out. Yeah, interesting product.
It seems like maybe that's not uh, their intended customer though. It
Yeah,
seems like it's more towards like Chipotle would use this behind their chatbot on their homepage that all their users can go help add things to their
yeah,
cart with, you know?
yeah. And like for example, like the options for the guardrails were just to block, flag, or ignore, not to sanitize.
Mm.
So yeah, that in a coding session, it could be very disruptive to have if you have something bad in your context, your session is bye bye.
Yeah, if you block it, you got to literally back up your conversation to where that's not in your history anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
So you really want sanitization, not blocking in some cases.
yeah, yeah. And then sanitization has its own rabbit hole if you're trying to make it usable for coders, right? It seems like the use case of helping a chatbot be more efficient and not talk and not, your Chipotle order bot does not want to talk about politics. It seems like
Yeah,
that use case is much easier and a
yeah,
much more intuitive usage of an AI gateway. As soon as you get into trying to protect engineers and coding, it's much more difficult. There's a rabbit hole of a lot of different use cases that are hard to figure out the right way. Like, instance, do you sanitize the bad thing that came out of a coder? And then when the code comes back, it has the sanitization in it. Do you block it, which shuts down their session? There's a lot of things that will annoy engineers.
yeah. All right, before we still got time. Yeah, so let's talk about the last segment, which was um how AI is affecting junior engineers.
Yeah, so I have some stats here. There's a lot of talk about this on the web. There's folks that are pretty hung up about the fact about whether they would, there's been a number of engineers, they're, I think, of world acclaim that have said they don't know whether they would recommend going into engineering. Some have said yes, some have said no. U.S. programmer employment fell 27.5% between 2023 and 2025, according to BLS. But software developer employment only fell 0.3%.
What's the difference?
So I think the distinction that they're using is task-based versus design-oriented roles. So I think that probably US programmers employment would be more like Odesk type stuff, or people who are working on contract perhaps. Whereas, and I'm honestly just speculating, I guess. Mm-hmm. And then design-oriented roles would be more like of what you'd traditionally expect, like software engineer, full-time, FTE. Junior developer job postings are down 40% versus pre-2022 levels, where CS grads continue to increase. So CS grads are increasing, job postings for junior developer jobs are down. The unemployment rate for CS grads is higher than the overall US average of 4.3%. So I think CS grads are at 6.1%, and computer engineering grads are 7.5%. 60% of companies likely to lay off employees in 2026, and 40% plan to replace workers with AI, which comes from resume.org survey. So I wonder if that's maybe the best survey, but that's one of them. So people have asked me about this. People have been worried about what happens if junior engineers have a harder time getting jobs? How are they going to become mid-level engineers? How are mid-level engineers going to turn into senior engineers, et cetera? Mm-hmm. And, there's a part of me that believes that it's a little bit of it's the wrong way to think about it, mm-hmm. right? Like the idea that you're going to have, how software companies have always been set up in the past, at least as far as I've seen, is a lot of times the junior engineers you're giving them smaller tasks to work on, something that at this point you would just hand to an agent, right? And then mid-level engineers are like the ones who have basically proved themselves and are the workhorses, right? Senior engineers are often workhorses as well, but they tend to do a lot more mentoring, leading, and architecture reviews, mm-hmm. doing cross-team things, right? ADRs and things like that, coming up with big strategic changes, et cetera. I think that a lot of that is going to consolidate. The idea that you're going to have junior engineers coming in to do smaller tasks, I think is not necessarily the way you should look at it. I mm-hmm. I think that what's going to happen is that junior engineers aren't going to come in as junior engineers. They're just going to come in as engineers. They're going to come in as orchestration of agents. Is going to be the way that software engineering is done in the future. I think that the idea that the junior engineer having less experience is going to be less about writing code and going to be more about architecture type things. I think they're going to
I think part of the issue is is the education system. If the education system, the concept of a CS major, is it so important to teach people the science of computing? I think there's some relevance to it. I think it's important that as a software engineer, I don't have a college degree. I didn't learn about the difference between the stack and the heap until later on, until I was working for 10 years. And I actually started to understand how computers work. I learned how to code long before I knew the science of engineering. I learned about loops and conditionals. I didn't have classical training.
Yeah.
And I question if any of that knowledge is actually useful. Like, and should colleges, universities be training engineers for a workforce that needs to teach them how to do AI coding? Like, there's a whole new level of abstraction. I mean, we've talked about, you know, do we even care about code? Is it something that I even worry about? And I suspect that in the future that these models will not even, you'll be so far removed from code that it doesn't even matter. Like, you get asked, like, do you want to write it in Python or do you want to write it in JavaScript? It's like, there's very few reasons to care about that.
Yeah.
Like, very few reasons to worry about the underlying language that's being coded as time goes. So yeah, I think the real issue is the education. Is that, to me, the difference between a junior engineer and a senior engineer is just that you've been through the war a little bit longer, that
Yeah.
how to, what are the things, like, to, like, the pitfalls, about real world crises. You've
Yeah.
kind of got a little, like, time in the trenches.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be that something more than somebody else. Like, so yeah, I don't, unless, and I think things are moving so fast that probably most universities aren't
Yeah.
teaching students this skill set.
Their
So
curriculum probably hasn't really changed at all, right?
I mean, maybe some universities are on the bleeding edge, like
Mm-hmm.
maybe MIT or somebody else,
Like
but
Stanford or something.
yeah, but like, if you're wanting to be a software engineer, and like, maybe that's just not even a thing that you go to school for. Like, maybe you could be, maybe the thing that you go to school for is just a different thing. Like, it's not for software engineering, it's not for computer science. It's like a different type of um study program where you learn how to, like, I mean, I think all careers are at this, like, kind of inflection point. Whether
Mm-hmm.
you're an attorney or you are a marketer, I mean, I think social sciences are probably the exclusion to the rule, but like, all of these disciplines fundamentally have to change, because if you enter the workforce and you don't know how to use AI, you are going to have a hard time finding a job. Like,
Yeah.
I would feel really bad if you just finished 4 years of a program and they did not teach you anything about AI.
Yeah. I mean, the only
You
saving
just
grace I
wasted a
get,
lot of money.
you know, it's this weird donut hole right now where um, both I think that everyone needs to learn about AI, and I wish the college curriculum would catch up. But also at the same time, when you're out there on the market pitching products and talking to companies about AI, a lot of them don't know what to do yet. So
Yeah.
um, it's this
And
weird
by
moment where, like, you know that the AI is the future, but not everyone knows how they want to introduce it to their own company yet.
and by
So
the time they figure it out, it's going to be changed already too, because it's
yeah,
moving so fast.
but my recommendation to junior engineers out there would be to become the best at AI. And as much as it might be easy for you to get down on the fact that the world has changed, recognize that this is an opportunity. If you embrace the opportunity and get really good at AI, then I think you're going to skip levels in your career. When you look back at your career, and if you could somehow go back in time and go to a different dimension where AI didn't come out, I think
Mm-hmm.
you'd be much further ahead in today's timeline than you would be if you had to go through all the decades of engineering work that I did.
Yeah, I think the problem, like, I think why companies hire junior engineers, there's like a spectrum of reasons. Like, you might do it because you think you're getting, it's kind of like, I don't know if you follow sports at all, but like, when you draft somebody and they make the league minimum, you kind of control their contract for a few years. Like in
Yeah.
baseball, it's like 6 years. So
Mm-hmm.
you can pay them the league minimum, and before you have to pay them like a hefty contract. And
Mm-hmm.
like, baseball doesn't have a salary cap, but like hockey, all these sports, football, like, and so what happens is like, you try to draft really good people, and then you hope that they do really well, and then you don't have to pay them a hefty salary.
Yeah.
So like, I think some companies do that. They'll go and do that, but like, there's a hidden cost with that, which is that you actually have to, like, the difference between an athlete and like somebody that you hire that's junior is that you're going to have to mentor them. Like,
Yeah.
it's going to take cycles. They're not going to be able to learn on their own. And that might be a cost that you're willing to take on, because they'll be really grateful, an entry level job, and you can groom them into being a mid-level or a senior level over time. I think that sort of, I don't think companies have time for that. Like, I think many companies, like small companies that would have had an appetite to do that, are not going to be able to do that in the future, like, or even now, because they're going to want to build a workforce of like people that allow them to run really fast. They're not going to have time to slow down and teach a junior person, or be willing to take on the additional payroll. Like, the future of kind of like the balance sheet for venture capitalists is probably light and lean. You know, like, how many digital workers do you have versus how many humans do you have that are capable of kind of squeezing every little bit of performance out of your digital workforce?
Yeah. It's an interesting debate, because on the one hand, there's a lot of folks out there who think that, and they might be right, I'm not sure, but they kind of think that, like, well, if all the coding becomes, let's say, easy, right? It's done. Then wouldn't you need less software engineers, because you would have, one or two software engineers per product, and they could handle the whole thing. It's mostly about vision and tickets coming in, and then work coming out by the agents. You maybe have to review it and test it. Maybe you have more QA and more review. And then wouldn't you, as a company, have less engineers? And the answer to that might be yes, right? But what about, what about like the idea that, like, do you think that all the software that could exist is existing today? Like, do you think that in the world of what's possible in the for the forever, right? Do you think that we've hit 10% of it, of software that's possible, 20%? I think we're at 1%. I think that, like,
there's always going to be new problems and new things that are, even if you were at 100% right now at this point in history, tomorrow it would be different, because there are new problems that need to be solved.
I think there's going to be an explosion of entrepreneurship out of this, because now everyone can start companies in their basement even easier and get it to market pretty quickly. I think
they have to. You have to do that, because what are if companies are laying off people, and there's all this workforce that can't find jobs, like, and like manual labor is being more and more automated, right? Like, even when you go to McDonald's, like, we had to throw a McDonald's analogy in somewhere. I mean, you don't even talk to somebody to place your order. You can do it on your phone, walk in the building. Sure, somebody's cooking your food, but robots will be doing that soon. Like, you're going to have to, there's going to have to be, I agree with you. I think there will be more entrepreneurs than ever that are doing stuff. And there's a lot of problems in the world that need to be solved. Yeah. But also, one other thing I thought of is, and this might be a bit of a stretch, is, are software engineers the new salespeople? Are software engineers the new marketers? Like, and I would say software engineers, like people who know how to, like, AI, maybe the new role is AI orchestrator. Does the AI orchestrator now not need those same people? Maybe some sales are still human based, because there's a trust element associated with it. I don't know.
There's always been a game of telephone. There's always been a game of telephone that your customers unfortunately have to navigate between them telling somebody in their vendor or their third party what they want, or what bug they're encountering, or what feature they want. And they talk to this person whose discipline is a salesperson or account manager. And then that person goes and talks to a product manager. And then that person goes and talks to an engineering lead. And then that engineering lead creates a ticket that then an engineer works on. And then by the time the feature is rolled out, the customer's like, what the hell did you build? Right.
Yeah.
And I think that more and more likely it's going to be the case that the person who is actually orchestrating the work is going to be closer with fewer rungs, maybe no rungs from the customer. And I think that that is going to have some great benefits. I've seen this in my own career where, we had like, at a company we both worked for actually in the past, there was like a very high profile customer and they wanted something and they were threatening to leave if they didn't get it. And it was just one of those moments where it was like, we need to get the engineering team on the phone with them and talk to them because we can't get this wrong. Right. We need to figure out what their problem is. And I got on the phone with them and I talked to them. And then I realized that like all the things we were trying to do in the past for them was not actually what they wanted. And it was so easy. We just had to do this one feature. And it was because all these rungs of like telephone was lost. And now you have the person who's actually going to write the code talking to the customer. And they're like, oh yeah, I know what to do, and they were thrilled. So I think that that's going to break down a little bit. But I guess my other point is there's going to be far more companies. I think that companies maybe are going to shrink in the engineering department, but I think there's going to be far more companies. And I think the engineering companies, the growth companies that don't shrink, that are actually expanding their software engineering departments, are doing so not because they can't do more with less. It's because they want to do more with more. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They want to expand into more products and more industries and get more market share. It's like what I was saying before. Like, I think value companies who don't know what to do with the extra productivity may lay off in order to increase their margins. But the growth companies, they can't afford to limit their vision. They need to get to their vision faster because the other growth companies are going to be doing that, So the race becomes even more fevered. So in my opinion, and this will be kind of like one of those predictions where maybe I'm wrong on and you can look back, but I think that there's going to be a shortage of software engineers. I think that there's going to be not enough. And if you ask me what's going to happen to the junior engineering market, I think that people are going to be hiring junior engineers because they can't find any more senior engineers.
Gotcha.
And I think that they're going to be the whole mentorship is going to happen again. But now instead of mentoring your junior engineers on how to like do, clean code, you're going to be mentoring your junior engineers on how to manage these agents,
Yeah.
That's just going to happen, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that much more will be expected of companies in the future. So it's not just about, what are you doing and what are you building, but how quickly are you doing it? How are you interfacing with your customers? Those that are, like you said, those that are removing the middleman and talking directly to the customer, reducing the cycles, are going to be the ones that win the business because they're adaptive and they're moving quickly. And so, I don't know what we're going to do next week. I think let's keep doing AI gateways. Let's look at them all.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody for joining.
Next week.
What's that?
Do I get to do news again next week?
Yeah, we'll do news or noise. We'll just keep doing this for a little bit.
Nice.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining.